All right, man. We finally had the season finale, Broly and Invincible, episode 15, season 1, season finale. So let's go ahead and get into it. A cold analytical part of Nolan's mind, the part that had pacified worlds, recognized the phenomenon for what it was. It was a critical mass of psychological trauma. He saw Broly freeze, the life snuffed out of his eyes, replaced by the hollow stillness of a system and a catastrophic overload. The Saiyan was a bomb whose trigger had just been pulled, and the timer was counting down from an impossibly small number. Good, the Viltrumite warrior thought. The sentiment, cold and clean, let him break. A shattered psyche would make more mistakes. But he would not wait for the detonation to happen. He would be the needle that deflates the balloon before it could even get a chance to pop. A preemptive strike delivered with the full contemptuous force of his own might that would reduce this burgeoning cataclysm to a sputter. He would put this rabid animal down for good. He shot forward, a crimson spear aimed at the heart of the gathering storm. There was no finesse this time, no tactical feint. This was a statement of absolute dominance, a punch meant to atomize, to erase. The air itself tore around him, a sonic boom lagging futilely behind his passage. He saw the back of Broly's head, the boy still utterly oblivious. He was a perfect stationary target. His fist, capable of punching through continental plates, connected with the space just behind Broly's skull. It did not connect with flesh. It connected with a wall, followed by silence. An invisible, immovable wall of pure force manifested the instant before impact. It did not yield. It did not shudder. It did not even acknowledge the strike itself. The energy was not explosive. It was absolute. All the kinetic fury of Omniman's charge, the velocity, the mass, the world-shattering power was not absorbed, but reflected back at him with interest. The sound was a deep, resonant thump. A physical blow to the eardrums of everyone in the city. It was the sound of reality itself rejecting his presence. Nolan's eyes bulged, his victorious snarl instantly wiped from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. His arm from fist to shoulder screamed in white-hot agony, the bones vibrating as if they'd been struck by a planetoid. The force did not throw him back. It unmade his momentum. He was not knocked away. He was deleted from that space, rejected. He was flung backward, through the air like a discarded toy, his body a limp rag doll torn from the hands of a petulant giant. He tumbled end over end, completely out of control, the ruined cityscape whirling in dizzying, nauseating blur. He smashed through the skeletal remains of an office tower, glass and steel offering no more resistance, then followed by cobwebs, before finally skidding to a grinding, humiliating halt a mile away, embedded in the side of a bank building. For a long, dazed moment, he could only lie there, the taste of his own blood in his mouth, the echo of that impossible force still ringing within his bones. He had not been beaten by a punch or a technique. He had been dismissed entirely by just aura. A mere byproduct of the boy's awakening had swatted him from the sky like he was a gnat in the wind. The arrogant conqueror was gone and was replaced for the first time in centuries by the primal chilling understanding of complete inferiority. A mile away, Nolan pushed himself from the crater his body had made. In the bank's marble facade, dust and chips of stone rained down around him. His arm, the one that had struck the impossible wall around Broly, throbbed with a deep, concerning ache. It wasn't broken, but it was bruised, battered. The sensation was so alien he almost couldn't even place it. The shock was a cold water bath, washing away the last vestiges of his warrior's arrogance. That hadn't been a counterattack, it had been an automatic response, like an immune system rejecting away a virus. And he was the virus in that circumstance. His eyes, wide with a dawning primal fear, locked onto the epicenter of the silent storm. Broly had still not moved, but the colorless distortion around him was intensifying, warping the light, making the very air seem to curdle. The rubble that had been levitating began to vibrate and then shudder, then disintegrate into finer and finer particles until they were just motes of dust caught in a shimmering, heartless inferno. Then the silence broke. It did not break with a shout or a scream or a roar of defiance. It broke with a sound that was none of those things and all of them at once. It was a raw, guttural, and utterly soul-shattering roar that seemed to originate from the core of the planet itself. It was the sound of a heart being torn in two, of a mind fracturing into billions of pieces, of grief so profound it could no longer be contained by mere flesh and bone. The moment the sound left Broly's lips, the contained distortion around him detonated. A sphere of incandescent emerald energy erupted outwards, not like fire, but like a new vengeful star being born in the city's heart. It was silent for a breathtaking, horrifying second, a perfect, expanding sphere of annihilation, before the sound caught up with a crack, and then a thum. That was less a sound and more the death rattle of the atmosphere itself. Nolan's instinct screamed. He didn't think. He simply fled. He shot vertically into the sky faster than he ever had. A desperate crimson streak against the booming green hellscape. The shockwave chased him, a visible ring of superheated air and vaporized matter that overtook the city blocks below. Where it touched, buildings didn't collapse, they vanished. Office towers, apartments, parking garages, all were simply erased, reduced to expanding clouds of plasma and dust. The cityscape was scalpeled. A perfect glass, smooth crater hundreds of feet deep, now marking where a downtown once stood. And as he climbed, risking a glance down, Nolan saw the form at the center of the Holocaust. Broly was changing. The boy's massive frame was swelling further. His muscles expanding, distorting, coiling into living mountains of power that strained against his very skin. Veins bulged, pulsing with a neon green light to them. And his hair, the wild black mane, began to ignite from the roots up, the blackness burning away into a blazing, brilliant, and terrifying shade of gold. It was the first stage of the legendary Super Saiyan that had awakened, and Earth was the cradle of its fury. For a moment there was a fragile, hard-won peace in the chaos. Adam Eve stood at the head of a column of survivors, her latest and largest pink energy bridge funneling hundreds of sobbing, shell-shocked people away from the war zone and toward the relative safety of the city's outskirts. She was panting, sweat mingling with the grime on her face, her energy reserves dipping quite low. But it was working. She could see the end of the immediate crisis, a path cleared through the hellscape. A tiny defiant spark of hope flickered within her chest. Then the world turned green. It wasn't a light that appeared in the distance. It was as if the air itself had ignited. A silent, searing wave of emerald fire erupted from the battle's epicenter, consuming the horizon. There was no sound at first, just an impossible, accelerating visual of the city skyline. The mangled skyscrapers she had just shielded, the streets she had just cleared, were being unmade. It rolled toward her, not like an explosion, but like a tidal wave of pure entropy, a biblical plague of light, of green light that erased everything it touched, leaving only a glowing, glassy flatness in its wake. Eve's hand, still outstretched from her construct, fell limply to her side. The intricate pink bridge flickered and died. Her jaw went slack. No. The word was a breath, stolen by the vacuum of her own disbelief. This wasn't destruction. This was deletion. The sheer casual scale of it was beyond any villain, any monster, any natural disaster she had ever come across. The sound hit a second later, a deep tectonic whoom. That wasn't a noise so much as a physical pressure, slamming into her chest and making the ground beneath her feet tremble. The heat of it was felt from miles away, and it washed over her face like the opening of a colossal oven. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of tactical analysis and molecular comprehension, could only process one terrifying, simple truth. That wasn't a weapon going off. That wasn't a bomb. The green energy, even from this distance, was terrifyingly, intimately familiar. It was a distorted galactic scale amplification of what she had felt during their training sessions. The same emerald-like life force now twisted into a scream of pure, world-ending rage. Broly. The hope in her chest didn't just die, it was vaporized and replaced by the cold, suffocating certainty that they hadn't been fighting to save the city. They had been fighting to choose its destroyer. And now, the one they had tried to protect had become a force of nature that made Omniman look like a petty thug. The war for Earth was over. Its annihilation had now begun. The world held its breath. The cataclysmic roar had faded, but its echo was seared into the very atoms of the air, where a bustling city center had once stood. There was now only a vast shallow sea of green glass, still glowing with residual emerald heat. At its center stood the author of the apocalypse, no longer the brooding boy Nolan had manipulated and condescended to. Broly was wreathed in a terrifying new aura. It wasn't the wild flaming corona of his earlier rage. This was a serene, chilling mantle of solid, blazing gold. His hair defying gravity and reason shone with the light of a captive star. His musculature had swelled into grotesque divine proportions, every cord and sinew a promise of immeasurable effortless violence. Yet his face was the most frightening part. It was not contorted in a snarl, but locked in a vacant, almost placid-like trance. His eyes showed no pupils, but by expression he saw everything and nothing at the same time, their gaze fixed on some internal horizon of infinite pain. He was a monument to grief, and the monument was alive and vengeful. From his vantage point high in the smoke-choked sky, Omniman felt a primal chill that had nothing to do with altitude. This was not the volatile, predictable rage of a child throwing a tantrum with cosmic power. This was something else entirely. The chaotic spark had stabilized into a cold, perpetual fusion reactor of wrath. Every instinct honed across centuries of conquest, every victory against alien leviathans and rebel armies screamed a single silent warning. Predator, you are now prey. His mind, a tactical supercomputer, raced through scenarios and found only dead ends. Direct confrontation was suicide. The invisible wall that had shattered his arm was proof of that. Feints and misdirection were a fool's game against a being whose mere passive energy seemed to be able to erase city blocks. For the first time since arriving on this planet, Nolan Grayson was completely, utterly out of options. He wasn't facing a stronger opponent. He was facing a fundamental law of physics that had decided it was personally angry with him. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He had to move, to act, to do something other than hover here, a spectator at his own impending execution. He shifted his weight minutely, a barely perceptible adjustment in his fight stance. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Broly vanished. There was no blur of motion, no sonic boom. It was as if he simply ceased to be present in one location. The air where he stood didn't even have the courtesy to rush in and fill the void. A fraction of a second later, a new presence manifested directly behind Omniman. There was no sound, no disturbance of the air, only an immense silent pressure, like a mountain range materializing at his back, and the searing radioactive heat of the golden aura washing over him. Nolan's blood ran cold. He didn't dare turn. He didn't need to. The message was as clear as it was terrifying. There was no running, no hiding, no strategy. There was only the judgment of the golden god he had foolishly and arrogantly created. The world hung in a suspended, breathless moment. Omni-Man hovered paralyzed, the searing heat of the golden aura at his back, a brand of his own doom. He was a fly caught in amber, frozen before the swatter fell. There was no wind-up, no telegraph of motion from the deity behind him. Broly's form was a statue of contained annihilation. Then the statue moved. It was not a punch, not a wild swing born of rage. It was a casual, almost dismissive, upward tilt of Broly's elbow. The motion was so small, so economically brutal. It seemed to disdain the very concept of effort. There was no gathering of power and no roar of exertion, just a simple, horrifying application of absolute force. The point of Broly's elbow connected with the center of Omni-Man's back. The sound was not an explosion. It was deeper, more fundamental. It was the sound of the planet itself being struck like a gong, a single profound crump that was felt before it was heard, a physical blow to the senses of every living thing for 100 miles. Omni-Man did not fly downward. He became a projectile, a crimson smear fired from the hand of an enraged god. The air around his body compressed into a shell of white-hot plasma, and he crossed the distance to the ground in a time span too small to even measure. When he struck the glassy ruined plain below, it was not an impact, but like an extinction level event. The ground did not crack, it liquefied. A hemispherical wave of solid earth was blasted upward, instantly pulverized into superheated dust. The initial crater was a mile-wide maw that glowed with the light of newborn magma, but the energy did not stop there. It transferred deep into the planet's crust at this region, traveling through the continental plate like a shockwave through a crystal glass. This was the earthquake. It was not shaking, but a reconfiguration. The very foundation of the region convulsed. The force radiated outwards at hypersonic speeds, not as a wave of destruction, but as a command. Skyscrapers still standing on the periphery of the blast zone, having somehow survived the initial green eradication event, were not toppled, they were unmade. Their steel skeletons vibrated into dissonance and disintegrated. Highways coiled like ribbons thrown on a bed. The very topography of the land was written in an instant. A new range of jagged smoking hills and valleys born from a single casual blow. The planet had been wounded, and its scream was the sound of its own flesh tearing underneath. The sterile humming air of the underground bunker was a jarring contrast to the apocalyptic chaos which was now unfolding on the massive display on screen. Mark stumbled in, supporting a barely conscious immortal, with Adam Eve close behind. Their entrance was met with no fanfare. Cecil Stedman stood with his back to them, a rigid silhouette against a mosaic of live feeds showing the golden inferno that was Broly and the seismic devastation he was now unleashing. Cecil's voice cut through the din of blaring alerts, calm and brittle as ice. "Well," he stated without turning, "the good news is that Omniman has no chance of winning against Broly." He finally pivoted, his face a grim mask of exhaustion and fury. He gestured sharply at the main screen where Broly stood, a placid golden god amidst the ruination. "And the bad news is that we might lose our planet because of it." In a rare, raw display of frustration, he snatched a clipboard from a console and slammed it onto the floor. The crack of plastic and the scatter of paper were violently loud in the sealed room. "Damn it!" he snarled, the word tearing from him. Immortal couldn't keep his damn mouth shut. He might have just cost us our world. Mark's brain, already reeling from his father's betrayal and physical trauma, short-circuited. He blinked, his gaze darting from Cecil's livid face to Eve's pained one. The implication settled like a dead weight. "Wait," he breathed, his voice trembling with dawning horror. "They knew? You knew my dad killed the Guardians?" The betrayal was a fresh searing wound layered perfectly over the first. His father was a monster, and the people he trusted to lead the planet's defense had hidden this from him. Eve couldn't meet his eyes, her own filled with a guilty anguish. "I found out recently," she confessed, her voice soft. "That's what the call was about when Cecil pulled me away from you and Broly. He told me the truth." Mark stared at her. The memory of that roadside conversation, of her hopeful plans for a better world, now curdled by the secret that she now carried. Cecil stepped forward, his patience visibly evaporating. "You can be mad later, Grayson," he barked, his voice sharp enough to make Mark flinch. "You can file a formal complaint. You can hate my guts. You can put it on my damn tombstone. If we live through the next hour. But the stakes on those screens are a little more important than your feelings or a simple breach of trust." He stabbed a finger towards the image of Broly. "That is what we're trying to prevent. We contain the truth to contain him. Because we knew the second Broly learned that the man he broke bread with was the one who murdered his father figure, the only thing left to discuss would be the method of our extinction. This wasn't a conspiracy against you, Mark. It was a desperate last-ditch quarantine of a truth that was so volatile it could, and as we can see, is cracking this damn planet in half. So yes, we knew. And we would do it again to buy a single second more of control. Now, unless you have a plan to calm down a grieving berserker god, I suggest you get on board with saving what's left of this world while we still can." The tension in the bunker was a physical thing, thick enough to choke on. Cecil's words hung in the air, a grim admission of guilt and necessity. Before Mark could form a retort, a new gravelly voice cut through the hum of machinery from the shadows near the entrance. "That," the voice stated, "is where I can be of assistance." Every head turned. Paragus stood there, his form clad in worn utilitarian armor, his face etched with lines of bitterness and a chilling calculated calm. He looked utterly out of place in the high-tech command center, a ghost from Broly's traumatic past, stepping into the heart of the present crisis. Cecil's agents immediately drew their weapons, but he raised a hand, stopping them cold. His sharp eyes narrowed, not in surprise, but in grim expectation. "How did you get in here?" he demanded, his voice low. Paragus didn't flinch. "Your intelligence," you call him robot, is a pragmatist. He recognized that my unique familiarity with my son's condition outweighs any past transgressions. We reached an agreement to bypass your more tedious security protocols in the face of planetary annihilation. As if on cue, a nearby monitor flickered and robot synthesized voice confirmed. The threat assessment is accurate. Allowing Paragus access presented a higher probability of containment than continued exclusion. The math was simple. Cecil took a slow, deliberate step toward the uninvited Saiyan, his expression unreadable. He stopped, mere feet from Paragus, the two older men locked in a silent battle of wills. The fate of the world pivoted in this unlikely standoff. "Well," Cecil finally said, his voice dropping to a confidential, dangerous register, "it seems you've been listening, so tell me, before I decide whether to thank you or have you shot, what is your solution?" A geyser of molten rock and vaporized soil heralded Omniman's return. He erupted from the planetary wound his body had created, his flight path wavering unsteady. The invincible icon was gone, replaced by a battered, bleeding testament to his own hubris. Every inch of his body was a symphony of agony, a pain so profound it was a new unwelcome universe of sensation. His body was scarred and cracked. His cape hung in tatters, and the arm Broly had shattered was a mere aura throb with a sickening deep bone ache. The taste of his own Viltrumite blood was a constant, copy reminder that he was, in fact, very breakable. But a Viltrumite did not yield. Surrender was a genetic obscenity. Even with one eye swollen shut and his vision swimming, the core programming of his people, conquer or die, overrode the screaming protest of his broken form. With a raw, guttural scream that was equal parts defiance and primal terror, he channeled every last vestige of his power. He became a missile of pure, desperate intent, aimed once more at the golden god who had humiliated him. He shot across the glassy plain, a final suicidal charge. He didn't think of strategy, of Earth, or of his son. There was only the enemy, a fixed point in a tilting, broken world. He pulled his one good arm back, fist clenched, putting the entirety of his waning mass and velocity into a single definitive punch aimed at Broly's impassive face. The golden deity didn't move. He didn't even blink. As Omniman closed the final fatal feat, Broly's hand simply materialized in the path of the attack. It wasn't a block. It was a casual, almost dismissive interception. His massive fingers closed around Nolan's fist, and the continent-shattering momentum of the Viltrumite's charge ceased to exist. It wasn't absorbed. It was simply negated, the kinetic energy vanishing into the fathomless well of Broly's power without so much as making his arm even tremble. For a horrifying heartbeat, Nolan hung in the air, his fist trapped in an unbreakable grip, his body frozen in mid-strike. He stared into Broly's vacant, pupilless eyes and saw no anger, no sport, no recognition. He only saw the void. Then, with a subtle, almost gentle twist of his wrist, Broly torqued the captured arm. The sound was a wet, sickening pop, a grotesque counterpoint to the cataclysmic booms that had preceded it. Omniman's shoulder dislocated with a brutal finality, the joint tearing free from its socket in an explosion of white-hot, nauseating pain that dwarfed all his previous injuries. A choked scream was ripped from his throat. But Broly wasn't finished. His grip shifted from the fist to the ruined shoulder itself. In one continuous fluid motion, he swung the Viltrumite's body as if he were tossing a sack of grains. Nolan became a living cannonball, hurled with contemptuous ease not toward the empty plain, but toward the last remaining skeletal skyline on the city's shattered horizon. He crashed through the support columns of a half-collapsed tower, the impact pulverizing concrete and steel. The structure groaned, buckled, and then collapsed in on itself, burying the would-be conqueror under 1,000 tons of rubble, a fitting tomb for his shattered ambitions. A terrifying silence descended, broken only by the groan of settling ruins and the faint sizzling hum of Broly's golden aura. He stood victorious, amidst a berserker god amidst the ashes of his own rage. but the consciousness that was Broly's, the boy who loved Debbie's cooking, who stargazed with Mark, who saw solace in Eve's quiet understanding, was no longer present. He was a passenger, locked in the deepest, most lightless obulate of his own mind, forced to watch the world through a keyhole as a primordial fury wore his skin. The legendary Super Saiyan form was not a suit of armor he wore. It was the storm itself, and he was merely the eye, a hollow center around which unimaginable power raged. His body was no longer his to command. It was a puppet, its strings pulled by a bottomless, self-perpetuating anguish. The initial singular grief over Beast's death had been the spark, but now the fire fed on itself, burning on the pure, undiluted fuel of his rage. There was no target left, no Omniman to focus on, and so the fury turned inward, amplifying in a feedback loop of incalculable power. This was not the controlled focus might he had learned with Eve. This was a raw, chaotic eruption. The brilliant gold of his aura began to flicker and spike at the edges, lashing out at the empty air like solar flares. The ground beneath his feet, already glassed and cratered, began to tremble anew, not from impacts, but from the sheer oppressive weight of his presence. Cracks webbed out from him, glowing with emerald-like light, as his leaking ki destabilized the very bedrock itself. The power was increasing, swelling beyond the confines of his physical form, becoming a self-cannibalizing reaction that threatened to tear his world apart, even as it sought more to destroy. The victory was absolute, but in achieving it he had become a world-ending problem with no off-switch. His anger a star-going supernova, destined to consume both itself and everything around it in its final, brilliant, and utterly tragic collapse. The grim silence of the bunker was broken only by the relentless catastrophic data streaming across the main screen. It showed Broly, a golden star of annihilation, his form flickering with unstable energy that was actively rewriting the geography of the region. Each spike in his power level correlated with a new seismic-like event, a fresh scar on the planet's face. It was against this backdrop of impending doom that Paragus laid out his solution. The chain of subjugation is ready, Paragus stated. His voice a low, gravelly rumble that held no paternal warmth, only the cold satisfaction of a completed project. He produced a small, sleek data slate from his armor, displaying schematics of a brutal-looking collar. It was forged from a dull, grayish alloy, intricately engraved with circuitry that pulsed with a faint, malevolent purple-like light. I have spent years perfecting it. It does not merely suppress his power, it leashes it. It siphons the berserker energy at its source and contains it, forcing his biology to stabilize itself rapidly. It might hurt him slightly, but it will save him from burning out his energy and taking your world with him in the process. He let the image of the collar hang in the air, a stark symbol of control. The theory is proven. The prototypes worked on lesser beasts. The final design has been tested on its highest setting, on myself. He gestured vaguely to the faint scarred lines on his own neck, a testament to his fanatical dedication. The problem is not the collar. The problem is application. We have one chance. We must get it around his neck and activate it. He will not simply allow this, of course. A heavily hopeless silence filled the room. The plan was monstrous, but the alternative was playing out in real time. On the monitors, Cecil Stedman let out a long, weary breath. The sound of a man who had run out of choices. He pinched the bridge of his nose, his eyes still fixed on the screen showing the destabilizing event. It's a vile option, he conceded, his voice stripped of all emotion. But it is currently the only option we have. We are no longer in the business of ideals. We are in the business of triage. I agree. We proceed. No. The word was sharp, clear, and filled with a furious protective heat. All eyes turned to Adam Eve. She stood apart from the group, her fists clenched, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. She looked from Paragus' cold visage to Cecil's resigned one, her disgust palpable. You want to chain him, she said, her voice trembling with outrage. After everything he's been through, after everything that monster out there did to him, you want to turn your own son into a slave, a pet you can unleash and call back. That's not saving him. That's just trading one monster's control for another's. The moral line had been drawn, and Eve stood on one side, a defender of the person that Broly was, horrified at the violation of his very self. All eyes then shifted to Mark. He was leaning heavily against a console, his own body a map of the day's brutality. He looked utterly torn, his gaze dropping to the floor. He understood each position viscerally. The idea of shackling his best friend made him feel sick. He finally looked up, his eyes finding Eve's, filled with a profound and miserable apology. "Look, Eve, I hate it, but," he said, his voice raw, "I hate everything about it. It makes me want to vomit." He gestured weakly toward the main screen, where another mountain range was being born from Broly's uncontrolled emissions. "But look at him. That's not Broly in there anymore. That's the end of our world, if we don't stop him. There won't be a him left to save. There won't be anything left. I don't see any other way out of this." His words, heavy with reluctant acceptance, landed with finality. It was a terrible calculus of survival. The plan was abhorrent, but the cost of inaction was unthinkable. The silence that followed was an admission of their collective failures, a grim agreement to commit a necessary sin to avert a greater damnation. The air itself seemed to flinch as the golden deity's head turned. It was not a swift predatory movement, but a slow tectonic shift, the grinding of a continental plate. His blazing pupilless gaze swept over the devastation until it settled on two new fragile specks of life that had dared to enter his domain. Mark and Eve touched down on the glassy, still warm ground 100 yards away, their forms dwarfed with emanating power, the golden aura that wreathed Broly pulsed, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, the chaotic flares of energy stuttered. The relentless pressure bearing down on them lessened by a fraction. It was not recognition, not in any conscious sense, but something deeper. A primal, subconscious echo, the part of Broly that was still buried. The friend who trusted these two above all others was screaming from the depths, causing the godly engine of destruction to hesitate. Mark, sensing the infinitesimal opening, took a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture, his voice amplified to carry over the hum of his raw power. It was stripped of all heroism, filled only with a desperate, aching empathy. "Broly, it's us, man," he called out, the words fragile against the silence. "I know you're in there. I know you're fighting. And I know what he did." He didn't need to say Omniman's name. The truth of that betrayal was the very fuel of this cataclysm before him. "Look, we're not here to fight you, man. We can't. But you're coming apart. We have to help you before there's nothing left to save." He took another step, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We have to do something you're not going to like, but it's the only way. So please, just try to understand." For a fleeting second, it seemed as if the plea had reached him. The golden light seemed to soften around Broly's eyes, and then it happened. A spasm of untamable energy, a backlash from the very act of hesitation, racked Broly's form. The internal war between the buried boy and the berserker god had a physical consequence. His hands, which he had flung limply at his sides, jerked upward, as if pulled by strings. He didn't form a fist. He didn't gather energy. It was a reflexive, uncontrolled gesture, a single thunderous clap of his palms directly in front of his chest. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The concussive force generated was not a directed attack, but a spherical shockwave of pure concussive might. It was the universe's simplest and most brutal equation. Immense power meeting immense power in a single point, and the result was an expanding ring of annihilation. The ground between them vaporized. The air turned into a solid wall of force. Mark and Eve had no time to react, no time to brace. The wave hit them with the indifference of a natural disaster, lifting them off their feet and hurling them backward like leaves in a hurricane. They tumbled through the air, end over end, the cries lost in a deafening boom that followed a microsecond later, before crashing down amidst a shower of pulverized rock a quarter mile away. The silence that followed was broken only by Broly's own low, confused growl, the sound of a weapon wondering why it had even fired. A low resonant hum built in the air, a sound felt in the bones rather than heard by the ears. The golden energy that had been lashing uncontrollably from Broly's form began to coalesce. Drawn into a palm of his raised hand, it swirled, compressed into a sphere of incandescent green, a miniature sun of pure annihilation. The lighted cast painted the ruins in a sickly apocalyptic hue, and the very ground trembled as if in anticipation of its final world-ending release. He was a finger twitch away from erasing the horizon and the two friends who lay dazed within it. Then, a new voice cut through the harmonic of death. It wasn't a hero's shout, not a soldier's command. It was a raw, strained, and utterly human. Broly? The voice was a lifeline thrown into a storm. The colossal energy sphere flickered. Broly's head, which had been fixed on his target, slowly turned. His vacant, blazing eyes narrowed, not in rage, but in a flicker of something alien to this form. Confusion. There, standing at the jagged edge of the glass crater, was Debbie Grayson. Her car was parked haphazardly behind her door hanging open. Her face was streaked with tears and grime, her clothes dusty from her reckless drive. Cecil's frantic, terrible call, the confession of Nolan's betrayal that had been followed by the horror on the news. Broly fighting her husband before a sudden blast wiped every camera feed. She had driven straight into the heart of the apocalypse, guided by a fear greater than that for her own life. She took a shaky step forward, her hands held out, empty and pleading. Broly, honey, stop, she said, her voice breaking. Look at me. This isn't you. I know you. I know the boy who helps me with the dishes, the boy who gets shy when I hug him, the sweet, gentle boy who sleeps under my roof. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks now, but her voice grew stronger, infused with a ferocious maternal love. That's who you are. Not this. Never this. Whatever that monster did to you, whatever he took from you, don't let him take you too. Don't let him turn you into this. She took another step, now within the radius of his searing aura, the heat washing over her. I don't care what you look like. I don't care how powerful you are or can be. You are my boy, and I love you. Now, come back to me. Come back to us. The words "I love you" struck the berserker god with a force no physical blow could even muster. The green sphere in Broly's hand didn't just dissipate, it imploded with a soft whoomp, sucking light and sound back into his palm before vanishing. The tremor racked his massive golden form. The feral continuous growl in his chest choked off into a ragged human-sounding gasp. For the first time, his eyes showed not just light, but a flicker of profound, agonized recognition. The monster hesitated, and the boy, hearing his mother's voice, began to fight his way back to the surface. The world held its breath. The cataclysmic energy was gone, but the golden monstrous form of Broly still towered over the ruins, his entire body trembling with seismic effort of holding back the storm that was within. Debbie's words had anchored him, but the rage was a riptide, pulling him back into the depths. From the plume of dust where he and Eve had been thrown, a figure stirred. Mark pushed himself up, his suit torn, his body screaming in protest. He ignored all the pain. His eyes locked on the struggling titan before him. He saw the conflict, the way Broly's hands clenched and unclenched, the way his head bowed as if carrying the weight of the world, the faint pain sounds that were more human than godly. He began to walk forward, each step a declaration. He didn't run and didn't fly. This wasn't a charge. It was an approach. She's right, Mark called out, his voice raw but clear, carrying over the crackle of Broly's flickering aura. Listen to her. He moved closer, stepping into the circle of devastation until he was standing beside his mother, looking up at his best friend. I know you're in there, man, fighting, Mark continued, his voice thickening with emotion. And I know it's the hardest fight you've ever been in. Harder than Battle Beast, harder than him. He couldn't bring himself to save his father. Not here, not now. He took a final step, not now close enough to feel the static heat of Broly's power, raising the hair on his arms. He looked up into those blazing, tormented eyes. But you're the strongest guy I know, Broly. Not because of this, he said, gesturing to the immense golden form, but because of what's underneath. You survived Monster Island. You survived losing Beats. You've been carrying this pain your whole life, and you still tried to be good. You're my best friend. Mark's voice broke, but he pushed the words out, each one a lifeline. You're my brother, and I know you can do this. I know you can beat this. Just come back to us, man, please. The word brother was a major key. It was the bond that transcended species, power, and even family lies. A massive shuddering sigh racked Broly's frame. The brilliant gold of his hair began to dim, flickering like a dying lamp, but it still remained. The golden aura which had dimmed at Mark's plea suddenly flared back to life. With violent intensity, a raw, guttural scream of agony tore from Broly's throat, a sound of pure internal torment. He wasn't fighting them, he was fighting himself. He brought his massive hands to his head, clawing at his temples as if trying to physically rip the berserker consciousness out of his own skull. I can't, he roared, the words distorted and thundering. His power didn't just return, it bucked. In spasm uncontrollably, waves of emerald energy erupted from him in unpredictable concussive bursts. One blast vaporized a nearby building to rubble. Another sheared off the top of a distant, still-standing skyscraper. The ground fissured anew, glowing cracks racing out from his feet like a spreading spiderweb of lava. He was a star in its death throes, and the planet was feeling its final chaotic contractions. Debbie flinched as a hot, stinging wind filled with grit and ki blasted over her, but she didn't retreat. Her maternal instincts overrode all sense of self-preservation. She took another determined step forward, her hand outstretched toward the storm of power that was her boy. Broly, listen to my voice, she cried out, her words almost swallowed by the roar of his energy. Before she could take another perilous step, a solid wall of shimmering pink energy materialized in front of her, deflecting a spray of molten rock and a wild tendril of green lightning. Adam Eve landed beside her, one hand maintaining the shield, the other gently but firmly holding Debbie back. Miss Grayson, no closer, Eve shouted, her face strained from the effort of holding the barrier against the chaotic blast. The energy is random now. I can't protect you if you're inside the blast zone. Debbie looked from Eve's determined face to her son, who was now on his knees, his massive frame convulsing as the golden and green light fought for dominance around him. The sight of him in such a profound plane shattered her heart anew. Then what do I do? Debbie yelled over the cacophony, her voice desperate. I can't just watch him suffer like that. We keep talking, Eve insisted, her shield flickering as another uncontrolled burst slammed into it. He heard you. He's fighting. And it's because of you guys. Your voice is the anchor. Just do it from here. Nodding, her face set with a grim mix of terror and resolve, the battle was no longer physical. It was a war for Broly's soul, fought with the only weapons that could possibly reach him, the voice of a mother and the unwavering shield of his own friends. The golden aura pulsed erratically, a visible heartbeat of the agony tearing him apart. Mark and Debbie's words had thrown a rope into the abyss, but Broly was still slipping, his fingers raw and bleeding as he clung to it, scratching at his own face. Then a new voice, softer but no less firm, joined the chorus of anchors. They're right, you know, Broly. Adam Eve stepped forward, her pink and white suit a stark, defined symbol of creation in the field of absolute destruction. She walked with calm certainty, her eyes not on the god, but on the friend she knew was trapped inside. I haven't known you as long as they have, she admitted, her voice carrying clearly a steady counterpoint to the chaotic hum of his power. I don't have years of memories, but I know what I've seen. I've seen you struggle. I've seen you fight for control, not to win a battle, but to stop yourself from cracking the world around you. I've seen a power that could shatter continents, and a heart that's terrified of crushing a single flower. She was closer now, close enough to feel the heat of his energy, drying her tears before they could fall. You told me once that strength isn't just about power. It's about knowing who you are. This, she gestured at his magnificent, terrifying form, this isn't you. It's just the pain, screaming. But underneath it, I've seen the real you. The one who wants to protect. The one who wants to build. Her voice softened, filled with hope that defied the apocalyptic landscape before them. And I still believe in that version of you. I still hope. I still know that when this is all over, you'll come with me. Not as a weapon, but as a partner, to help me build that better world we talked about. To use these hands, she said, looking at his massive, trembling fists, not to break mountains, but to move them for people who need a river. You are capable of so much more than destruction, Broly. Please, just come back to us. A shudder more violent than any before racked Broly's colossal frame. The golden light flickered wildly, and for a moment his form seemed to shrink, then swell again as the rage fought back. His head was bowed, his face a mask of torment. When he spoke, his voice was a fractured, grinding echo, layered with the roar of the storm and the whisper of the boy. Eve, I can't. I can't control this. It was the first coherent thought he'd formed since the transformation. A desperate confession of helplessness. But they didn't flinch. They didn't retreat. You don't have to control it alone, Eve whispered, taking the final step, standing directly before him, a tiny, fragile figure in the shadow of a rising demon. We're here. Yeah, we're here, Mark said, his voice thick with emotion, placing a hand on his friend's searing golden forearm. We're not leaving you, Debbie affirmed, her voice the steady bedrock beneath them all. Reaching up as if to touch his cheek, the three of them stood together, a united front of love and trust against the tempest. The three of them moved as one, a single entity of solace against the storm. Debbie, Mark, and Eve closed the final distance, ignoring the searing heat that radiated from his golden skin, and wrapped their arms around his massive, trembling form. It was an impossible hug, their arms not even reaching around the grotesque swell of his muscles, but the intent was absolute. For a moment, Broly stood rigid, the berserker god bewildered by this unconditional contact. Then, a great shuddering sigh racked his frame, and he seemed to lean into them, his head bowing low as a single steaming tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The brilliant, terrifying gold of his hair and aura began to flicker and dim, not with the violent instability of before, but like a fire gently subsiding. His form seemed to contract, the mountainous musculature softening, the oppressive weight of his power receding from a world-ending threat to the contained, manageable inferno. He was still the legendary Super Saiyan, but the vacancy in his eyes was gone and replaced by a pain exhaustive awareness. It was then that Eve, her own tears finally falling freely, met his gaze. I'm sorry for this, Broly, she whispered, the words a blade twisted in her own heart. For all of it. For the lie, and for this. Her hand, which had been resting on his arm, moved with a gentle, heartbreaking finality. From a compartment on her belt, she produced the chain of subjugation. It was cold and heavy in her palm, a stark contrast to the living, fading heat of his skin. This isn't to leash you, it's to give you back to yourself, give you back control of yourself. With a tenderness that defied the caller's brutal purpose, she reached up and clasped it around his neck. The dull alloy seemed to drink the lingering golden light from the air. For a second, nothing happened. Then the intricate purple circuitry flared to life with a low, sinister hum. Broly's eyes widened in a flash of shock and betrayal before they squeezed shut in pain. A violent spasm ran through him as the device activated, siphoning the cataclysmic energy from his cells. The last of the golden aura was violently sucked back into his own body, extinguished by the collar's field, leaving him in his base form, panting and kneeling on the broken ground, the weight of the world and his own exhaustion finally crashing down upon him. The quiet rage god was gone. The boy was back, saved, but now bound by the cold, necessary sin that had spared the earth. From the shadows of a collapsed overpass, a single eye, swollen and caked with drying blood, watched the scene unfold. Omniman observed the tender, devastating moment. The embrace, the tear, the cruel salvation of the caller. He saw the golden light, the power that had humiliated and broken him, be extinguished not by a superior warrior, but by pity and a piece of technology. The sight was a more profound defeat than any physical blow he could have obtained. His mission was ash, the carefully laid plans of decades integrating its society, siring an air, softening the planet for a bloodless annexation, were obliterated. He had not merely failed, he had created the very instrument of his failure. In his own arrogance, he had tortured the boy and in killing a mortal, revealed the truth that murdered beats, and in doing so, had unleashed a force that not only thwarted him, but could potentially rival the entire Viltrumite Empire itself. This planet was not a prime jewel ready for plucking. It was a nest of unpredictable, devastating variables. His son had rejected him. His wife's love he could no longer maintain. And the being he now knew as Broly was a living, breathing testament to his catastrophic miscalculations. Every breath was a stab of pain from his cracked ribs. His dislocated arm hung useless. To stay was to face capture, interrogation, and the utter annihilation of his dignity. There was no victory here, only the stench of ruin. With a final grimace of agony that was both physical and spiritual, Nolan pushed off from the rubble. His ascent was not the powerful, confident surge of a hero or a conqueror. It was a labored, painful climb. A wounded animal fleeing the scene of its hubris. He did not look back at the planet he had called home. He punched through the atmosphere, leaving behind the wreckage of his life, his mission and legacy, a solitary exile fleeing into the cold, silent dark of space before the consequences of his failure could fully consume him. The fragile silence that had settled over the crater was shattered by the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. It was a dry, mocking sound that echoed with a chilling familiarity in Broly's ears. From behind a skeletal framework of twisted steel, Paragus emerged, his weathered face etched with a look of grim triumph. "A truly touching display," he said. His voice gravelly rumbled that cut through the air. "You Earthlings never cease to amaze with your sentimentality. You've done what I, for years, could not. You've calmed the beast." Debbie, her arms still wrapped protectively around a kneeling Broly, stared in confusion at the stranger. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a mother's protective instinct. But Broly's reaction was far more profound. His head snapped up, his eyes, now their familiar dark hue, widening in utter disbelief. The voice had unlocked a vault of childhood memories, some harsh, some few tender, all overshadowed by fear and isolation. "Father?" The word was a disbelieving whisper, torn from a place of deep-seated trauma. What are you doing here?" His gaze then dropped to Eve, a dawning horror replacing his confusion. "Eve, what did you do to me?" he rasped, his hand instinctively moving towards the cold, unfamiliar weight of the collar that was now around his neck. "Stop!" Paragus commanded, his voice devoid of warmth, sharp as a whip crack. The moment Broly's fingers brushed the metal, the collar's purple circuitry flared with a sudden painful intensity. "Ah!" A jolt not of electricity, but of pure, overwhelming psychic command, seared through his nervous system. It was an absolute imperative overriding his own will. Broly's hand froze, then dropped to his side. As if the muscles had been severed, he stared at his own disobedient limb, a terrified understanding blooming in his eyes. He was a prisoner in his own body in a different way now. A faint, cruel smile touched Paragus' lips. "Good. You see now. The chain does not request, it commands." He turned his cape, shifting. "Now, follow me." Without another word, Paragus levitated from the ground and began to fly away at a steady, deliberate pace, and Broly followed. His body moved with a robotic, unwilling obedience, his feet lifting from the ground as the collar compelled him to obey. He managed one last desperate glance over his shoulder, a look filled with a torrent of unspoken agony, betrayal, and a silent plea for help. His eyes met Mark's horrified stare, Debbie's shocked expression, and Eve's guilt-ridden face. It was a wordless goodbye, a heart-wrenching image of a soul being dragged back into another cage that he thought he had escaped. Before he turned and flew after his father, a ghost following his master into the unknown. And that'll be the end of this episode, man. Alright, that'll be the end of this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's the end of this season. I decided to make this, more heartfelt because, realistically speaking, a Super Saiyan Broly fight with Omniman, that would there's no way this fight could have been dragged on. So I decided to focus on, other key players and stuff and things of that nature to make this episode compelling. Hope you guys liked it. Season 2, he'll have this collar on him and all that. We'll touch on that when we get there. I won't be doing it anytime soon because I'll be going back to Goku and Marvel and Goku and DC and probably Goku and Naruto too, and maybe some other projects or whatever. The reason I was able to put these videos back to back was simply because I wrote this entire script and then I decided to do it back to back to back. So now I'm going to go write the other scripts for all them before I go any further. So I might be gone for a minute. But anyways, man, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, all that. Super chat's open. Membership's open. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.